we hadn't really seen these sort of American Indian boarding schools on television before, and in film, really, in American film or TV, really. And while we were working on it in the art department, there were people who actually were in the art department whose relatives had been to institutions like this and who had kind of lived through these things. And so it really had a lot of weight to it. And, we kind of felt the responsibility of, this is such an important story. We need to tell this and tell it in the right way.
Hi, and welcome back to StudioBinder Academy. I'm Brandon. Today we're speaking with production designer Brandon Tonner-Connolly, who's worked on projects like The Bad Batch, Reservation Dogs, The Exorcist Believer, and I Saw the TV Glow. Brandon, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks so much for having me. Yeah, no, I love the show. Really excited to be here.
Now, to start off with, we always like to get everyone's background. Could you kind of tell us what inspired you to join the film industry?
Yeah, definitely. So I grew up kind of always loving movies, always loving film, and never knew anybody who worked in film. Nobody in my family did anything like that. But grew up an only child and kind of spent a lot of time just watching movies by myself or entertaining myself in that way. And so I knew I wanted to do something in that world. I think one time my only experience with the actual production of it was a Wes Craven movie came to shoot in like this small kind of like rusty like industrial suburb town that I'm from in New Jersey, and they shot there for a couple of days. And just seeing all of the kind of trailers lined up and just seeing everything happening there, I was really kind of excited that they were taking this really mundane reality that I kind of walked through every day and didn't think anything of, and like turning that into like a movie, into something so incredible and an enduring work of art. And so I went to school for, film theory and film criticism. And I thought that I would basically kind of make short, esoteric documentary movies that nobody saw and nobody ever cared about or made any money or anything like that. And instead, I kind of got out of school, and a friend, I was living with a couple of friends in Brooklyn, and one of them said, "Hey, would you mind filling in for me tomorrow on a music video shoot? I'm just helping out." I said, "Yeah, sounds kind of lame, but sure, I'll do it." And I did it. And I met the art director that first day, and they explained to me what an art director was. And immediately I was like, oh, this actually fits so many parts of the things that I love and that I'm really passionate about, so neatly. And I kind of just loved that you had to do so much research and that you really got into kind of learning about different kind of time periods or places or cultures or anything. I love that, you got to express kind of the emotions of the story through the visuals. And I love that you got to kind of put together your own team and kind of keep everyone united around like one vision and motivate everyone and do that. And so I kind of stuck with that art director. They brought me onto a couple of different like no budget commercial / music video jobs. And then, they were like, I'm going to design a feature, do you want to be the prop master? And I was like, yes, like, what's a prop master? Like, tell me and I'll do it. And so we did a couple of indie features together. I stuck with them for a while, kind of just learned everything about how to do props on set. And it was like, really small stuff where, it was kind of just like me and them being the art department, maybe one other PA or something. So I was prop mastering, assistant prop mastering, on-set dressing, doing all the kind of things like that, which gave me a really good opportunity just to kind of learn how a set works from, the, kind of smallest indie level up, and kind of get to do all those things myself. And loved it, was really passionate about it. I loved props because you get to tell parts of the story through, somebody's watch or somebody's wallet or, what they have in their keychain. It's just all those little choices you get to make with the director and the actor. And that kind of helps fill in the little, cracks in the story that they don't have time to fill in with dialogue or with other elements. So I loved that and loved working with the director, loved, kind of being a part of those things. And then plus the prop master, you get to be a hero sometimes, which is really nice when you can pull it off. And then started decorating, kind of wanted to get to fill out the world a little more. And then once I kind of learned, that aspect of things, really just said, well, I love what I'm doing, but I love to design. I'd love to be able to build the whole world with the rest of the creative team and kind of, fill out everything and kind of build a whole universe for the story to exist in. And so then, I kind of went back, got a little bit of, design training and the things that I needed, and then came out and, was really kind of going up a system of, prop mastering or decorating a union movie, and then designing a non-union movie and kind of going back and forth, and like one for them, one for me. And then, just until the point where I'd kind of built up my design career, where, I could be exclusively designing, and then kind of pushing forward into larger union movies and all the fun things that I'm doing now.
That's amazing. Yeah, I love hearing that, because, I've always heard coming up through the industry, work begets work. You had that music video shoot, and that kind of spawned off onto other projects as well. And networking is such a huge thing in the film industry. So I'm glad to hear that really worked out for you.
Yeah, no, I mean, you're totally right. And it's funny because I just did a couple of days of like teaching a seminar at SCAD, and then like a couple of other kind of brief engagements like that. And talking to all like the kids who are about to graduate and everything, and their questions are, how do you get into the industry? How do you kind of get your first job? How do you, really kind of start off? And as it sounds I'm sure it's frustrating advice to receive, but it's kind of like, it's just like, the more kind of people that you kind of talk to, or the more kind of people that you're able to get in touch with, and you're able to kind of vocalize what you want to do, or start to learn about what you want to do in that way. Like, the more you'll get to a place that, where you can kind of actualize those things and get into it. So yeah, which is itself, it's like, I'm sure, like I said, I'm sure that's frustrating advice or frustrating answer to receive if you're just graduated, but there's no kind of like surefire way. I think one of the people, after we had done a portfolio review and I kind of told them that, that and answered their question, we're like, yeah, like, I guess I'm just going to give up on thinking that like somebody's going to tell me that there's just like one website that I should like look on that will like, like job or something like that. Or if there's like one like account to follow. And I was like, yeah, probably. So, yeah.
Yeah, that doesn't really exist in the film industry. Now, I'd like to talk about your typical working process when you're brought onto a project. What does your pre-production process look like? Do you do a script breakdown or anything along those lines?
Yeah, I mean, I honestly, I love to talk about process. So I might go on for a little too long talking about process. But
that's okay.
This is a true joy. No, I feel like, so when I get a job or when I get a script, I'm mostly, and I'm kind of excited about it, or I think it's something that, that I might want to do. I'm reading the script, and I'm usually breaking it down. I'll come out of like the first read with like a set list of like all the different sets that are kind of in there. And then also another list of all the kind of like points that I specifically want to find references for, or just like ideas that I've had reading it, or if there are specific photographers I thought of, specific references, specific, paintings that I kind of wanted to bring in as references as I was reading along to it. I'll kind of have those two lists going, and then put together a lookbook for kind of initial meeting with the director and producers and everything. And the lookbook is something that's like, there are times when I'm like agonizing over it for like, a week or however long, and just trying to do it. And I think there are a million different ways to do it. My process with it tends to be kind of like very direct. I like to do like, a couple of images per page, or one image per page, just really have all the kind of focus on that one image. Because in my mind, when you're having that first meeting with the director, like, you're kind of getting to know each other and tossing around ideas, but hopefully you're coming out of it with an understanding that like, okay, if we are going to collaborate together on this, then like, here's the base level of like where we're starting from. And that initial lookbook is almost kind of like, I don't want to say a contract, but it's almost kind of like an initial offering where it's like, here's the direction that we might be going in if we decide to do this together. So here's where we're going to start at least. So kind of, after that, I'll get into everything with, hiring the team and bringing in the different department heads and the set decorator and the prop master and the art director and everything, getting into the crew hiring. And then for me, it's just, it all kind of starts with the references. And I am obsessed with references. Anybody who's worked with me will tell you. And, sometimes you're just constantly like searching for that one perfect image that's going to express something that's kind of ineffable, like about the script or the story that you haven't been able to articulate in words, or that, and sometimes, it's just a combination of pulling different elements from different reference photos and kind of assembling the world that you're talking about in that way. But yeah, I mean, and so I like to think of them as like kind of the foundation of like all the work you're going to do in the future. And like, if you have good references and good ideas in the beginning, then like, you can kind of build off of those to make like a good designed film, to make a well-designed film rather. But, if you start kind of from a place of like uncertainty, or if you're starting from a place where you're not totally happy with like what you're visualizing or what you're kind of articulating to other people in terms of your ideas, then, it's always kind of more challenging. And last thing I'll say about it is I do love to have all those things like up in the art office and printed just so that, and I like to have them like in a public space adjacent to the art office also, so that everybody who's walking by, whether it's the DP, whether it's the costume designer, whether it's the producers, whether it's the actors, anybody can kind of just like look to it and just say, okay, like this is what we're making. This is kind of the film that we're kind of going toward. And this is sort of the world that we're sort of building together, just so that everyone kind of, is in agreement with that. And so that you can subtly brainwash people into accepting what you're doing also.
Now, you spoke a little bit about working with the director. In your mind, what is your ideal working relationship with a director?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and again, I just had a great opportunity to work with the director who I really love, Jane, Schoenbrunn on I Saw the TV Glow. And in many ways, that was sort of an ideal director relationship or situation in a lot of ways. And reflecting back on it, I think it's because, for one thing, Jane came in and was extremely well prepared, like had like great ideas about like what they were interested in. And, had the story had clearly been like kicking around in their brain for a long time. And it was also very personal and very emotional to them. And so, that was great to come in with, and again, when we first started collaborating on that, they had a lookbook that was 300 pages of images, of paintings, of, everything. I know. Exactly. I was like, and it was like, I normally like director lookbooks, like not to, say anything about anybody, but normally director lookbooks, and like you look at them and you're like, oh yeah, that's like a Stephen Shore photograph. That's like this photograph. Like, the images tend to be like, you're like, oh yeah, of course, that's an image from Badlands, or like something that's like the images are like tend to be a little bit sometimes like well-worn territory. But in Jane's book, it was kind of just like, oh, even some of these movies, I don't know where these are from, or, I had to kind of like look it up and get into it. So it was nice to have that degree of preparation and to go into it with Eric, the DP, and be able to kind of talk through all the shots and, and kind of really get into the depths of what we were doing in prep and know it all kind of like right off the bat. But at the same time, Jane was also very, very open and inviting in terms of collaboration, and was very much like, here's, what my thoughts are, but I want to invite you into this world to kind of, bring your take to it also, and to kind of like bring your ideas to it as well, and to kind of like combine our visions into one thing in that way. And so, and was also very open to, despite the degree of preparation that we were doing, if we found a location that offered something that was, better than what we had been conceiving of, it's like, oh, great, this is amazing. Like, let's change the plan and do this kind of, let's find inspiration in that. So I think it's a combination of, the ideal situation, collaboration with the director, somebody who has that degree of preparation and that passion for the story. And then also has that, that willingness and that openness and that excitement to collaborate and to get your vision in there, and to kind of make it really, truly like a team effort in that way. And, honestly, what I kind of look for in a director relationship is like that passion too, like doing like, I Saw the TV Glow, doing Reservation Dogs, doing a couple of other projects that I've been lucky enough to be involved in recently. Like, I think that's one common thread, is that like the creators of it, like they have that passion for the storytelling. Like they have that kind of emotional connection to the material. Like they feel like this is a story that needs to be told, whether it's through the horror genre, or whether it's through, an FX TV show, whether it's through all these different ways. Like these are stories that need to be told. And for me, that's, something where I'm like, oh, like I want to be like a part of that. Like I feel lucky to be a part of that, when somebody has that kind of passion and enthusiasm and connection to it. And I can be a part of bringing that into the world and making that an object that other people can kind of share in. So.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it definitely shows, and Reservation Dogs was probably one of my favorite shows of the past few years. I just loved it. It was beautifully shot, beautiful story. I mean, the production design, kudos to you. So my hat's off to you, sir.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it.
Now, do you have any examples of working with a DP to kind of create a certain look for a location or a set?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think with working with the DP, there's always, it always goes from a question of abstract to, it always goes through the process of going from like, abstract concepts and thoughts to, very kind of concrete details, i.e. like, where is the lamp in the room, and like, what is this practical lighting source that we're using, and all of these things. And for me, that's part of the fun of that process is meeting somebody new and kind of getting to know, like, and, I mean, that's part of the fun of working in film and TV too, is like you're getting to meet new people and getting to know them like very quickly and getting to know like who they are and like what their aesthetic is like and, what they're like personality wise in terms of how they operate on set and how they collaborate and everything, and kind of constantly like, push, like constantly jostling to get in the, to kind of collaborate together in that way and fit together and kind of, so with the DP, I feel like that's an especially important relationship. Obviously, with the designer, I look to them as, a major collaborator and as somebody who I need to have on board with my vision of what we're doing. And, we need to be kind of like ideally a unified block, so that, when we are going to the director with ideas, or when we're kind of approaching these things, or when we're talking to producers about budgets and those things, like, we're kind of approaching it from a unified team perspective of, hey, like this is where we all want to go. So, let's try and get there and do it. And, I think to that end, like, Eric, you, the cinematographer of I Saw the TV Glow, I think there were a lot of moments in that movie where we kind of collaborated very closely. There's a scene in a couple scenes in one of the characters' basements, and it's kind of in the mid 90s. And, we kind of were just talking about the space and in the space, and we were, dressing it, I think maybe even at that point, and just kind of both came to the idea of, oh, what, it would be great to have like a light source here, but that's not like a lamp, something that, gives off kind of like a greenish glow, something that kind of reinforces this idea that we had kind of built in all these visual motifs of being trapped, of kind of being in like little prisons and things, and worlds within worlds. And so, so we came up with the idea of, oh, we need this fish tank here. Okay. And then, collaborated with that together and then figured out the lighting of it. And that became a major lighting element for that scene. And, kind of something that really set the tone for, I think for portions of the film. And then same thing with, when you're looking at like the television in that movie, like we had created some kind of, we had like a lighting designer create some kind of custom, static compositions so that we could be playing the static back on the television, doing playback like in the scene, and then still have that light kind of reflect on the actors and everything, so we weren't burning anything in later. And just talking about like the color of static and talking about like the busyness of the static and all those different things, and we need the blue static for this, we need the pink static for this, and getting into all of those was kind of fun, but was sort of again building that world together with that. And I think Reservation Dogs, working with Mark Schwartzbart, is incredible. And that's something where it's always, TV is kind of much faster than film in terms of the amount of time you have to prep and the amount of time you have to, to work with locations and everything. And so I think having him in that way, he and I both have like a little bit of like a shorthand and understanding of like, I know sort of when I'm finding the locations, okay, this is kind of one of the things that, this will be good for Mark because of this. And like, this is kind of like what he needs to do to make the show look good with the resources that he has and the time that we have to shoot it and everything. So I think in that way, we kind of, whenever I'm out scouting for locations, I'll look at those spaces and get into even more of, what can Mark do with this space? Because I guess I just have learned a while ago, and I think, it's obvious, but the most beautiful set in the world, if it's not lit well, if it's not shot well, then, it's not really going to accomplish the purpose that you're kind of trying to get across with it. So I'm, always kind of trying to consider those elements. I can remember one time, probably like, in my credit, this was like a decade ago, or maybe more than that, but I was young and youngish. And I had just gotten to go on a location scout to find like a last minute location for something else that had fallen through, and came back to see the DP and the director on set. And, and the DP was like, well, what direction were those windows facing? And I was like, I don't know. I was just looking at the location. My other thing is like, I wasn't looking at, the direction of the thing, thinking about the sound and that lighting. And then, from that, and I think, in that moment that DP was like, oh, well, some people would have. And I was like, you know what, you're right, actually. And then like that spurred from that moment on. I was like, what, I do need to actually incorporate that into my thinking, into my process as a designer, and make sure that I'm thinking about, all of those things. And that kind of was a nice lesson to learn a long time ago, an embarrassing lesson to learn at that moment. Yeah. So I think that, all of those things kind of factor into it when you're dealing with the DP or collaborating with the DP in that way.
Now, continuing with your previous work, you worked on different types of genres. Would you say there are any challenges, or what would be the main differences between, saying working on a comedy versus working on a horror film?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, it's always different in terms of, well, I guess actually thinking about it, maybe whether you're working on like a horror movie or like a comedy, I think that, the set can have its own tone and it doesn't necessarily need to sort of follow what's going on. I think, there can be different moments that are, either kind of livelier or kind of lighter or kind of heavier, depending on the individual scene and the people that are on the set. I've certainly been, working on comedies where the vibe is a little bit heavier and the vibe is a little bit less fun, just based on what's going on or who you're working with. And then, I've worked on horror films or other things where it's like a fun summer camp type of vibe, even though you're really into some deep, dark stuff like at the moment, just based on who you're collaborating with and, how everyone feels about the material they're making. So, and I think, I guess I also like to try and just approach every project as its own thing, and try to say, okay, even like regardless of like what sort of genre it is, like what does this story need and like what does the story kind of deserve in that way, and what are we trying to accomplish? And I just did a pilot with Sterling Harjo, who's one of the creators of Reservation Dogs, and that was kind of very much like a noirish type of a show, and we kind of talked about that a lot and I gotten that. But at the same time, it wasn't like, okay, so we need like, high key lighting and we need like these shadows and we need this other stuff. It was sort of like, how do we bring, our own kind of perspective on this story, or how do we bring like something unique and original to it, like in that, to that genre or to that way. So, so I think it's, I try to approach every project individually like that and see what you can bring to it. Rather than kind of like relying on this sort of like genre standards or this sort of like genre aesthetics in that way. And I feel like that typically works out well, and it all comes down to the director and the other people that you're collaborating with on it.
Okay. All right. That makes sense. Now, you had mentioned some of the differences between working on film versus TV. Is there anything that you've taken from one medium to that kind of helped with the other?
Yes, definitely. I feel like, again, like, TV is kind of a sprint, and, film features are more of like a marathon, in a pleasant way. And, I feel like the great thing about, film is you have more time to scout in the beginning, and you have almost like, after you do TV, it feels like oceans of time. It feels like a wealth of time that you have when you go back to film to like develop the concepts, to be scouting and to, and I love scouting, and not because you always find the right thing, but because every single thing that you scout is an opportunity to learn something else about the story, and an opportunity to learn something else about the world you're creating, and learn something else about your collaborators. And, when you take a director to a location and, they dislike it, that, tells you as much about what you're kind of doing and what you're looking for as anything else. And that just opens the conversation of, okay, well, what actually, what don't we like about this? And like, where are we going? And, and then, or you find something that you never could have imagined or that you never would have thought of. And then it's like, oh, great. Like, let's take inspiration from this and run with it and kind of augment this, or kind of, build our own world to bring our own kind of sensitivity to it. So you have so much time to like develop those relationships in it, and kind of develop those thoughts, and kind of develop those concepts when you're making a feature, which is really nice. Have endless conversations about the stuff, which is great. Which is like, that's, partially why I'm in it. Like, I want to be talking to somebody obsessively, at 1 o'clock in the morning about like, what are the ice cream flavors on this demonic ice cream truck that we're about to make, that the conversations I want to have in my life. And so I kind of try to bring that attitude to TV, where I think that a lot of times in television, the attitude is, okay, like, we need these locations and these need to be close together. So we're going to get one location that we like and then anchor the rest of them to it. And, okay, that location, that doesn't really matter so much. We're just in there for a brief beat, okay, well, let's prioritize. Let's do a little kind of triage with it. And it kind of just tends to really happen quickly. And for me, I kind of try to bring what I call in the art department, annoyingly probably to the art department people in TV stuff that I do, just bring a feature mindset to it. You want to approach it from the mindset of, we do have time. You want to approach it from the mindset of, the concepts we're developing are going to last and live on for a long time. And we're going to be building off of them while we're making the show. And then people are going to be watching them forever when they're watching the show. And so because of that, even though, there is pressure, even though there are time constraints, like, you still need to approach it from a thoughtful mindset of, we got to think all these things through. We got to kind of, talk about it all. We need to make the time to have these conversations. We need to make the time to develop these concepts together and to kind of get, deeper into it than you would, on some TV shows when it's just like, okay, we got to go like find this, let's do that. This will be good enough for that. So I think that's, that is something that I kind of try to bring from one element to another. And at the same time, I think, just with going back to like features after TV, I try to bring a sense of like, oh, I know that we could do this really quickly if we needed to, or I know that like, hey, if we needed to have this done by Wednesday, it could be done by Wednesday. And like, I know we know how to do that, but we do have this extra time. So, okay, that's actually a little bit of a relief, and that's actually a little bit more that we get to play with. So I think doing TV kind of sharpens, your timetable a bit, kind of sharpens your instincts in that way. Once you go back to the world of film, and then you can breathe a little bit easier also, because you're like, oh, we do have a moment here to talk about this stuff. Maybe we will have lunch one time this week. Who knows? Yeah, so those are kind of what I try to bring in between the two worlds, or lessons that I've learned in that way. I get into it. Yeah.
Now, some of your projects are more naturalistic and some more stylized. What would you say are some of the challenges in working in kind of both modes?
Yeah, I mean, I think, there are certainly projects that are a little bit more stylized, like TV Glow, or like other things or like The Bad Batch, or like other projects like that that I've done, Mona Lisa and the Blood Moon. And then there are things that want to feel a bit more natural, like Reservation Dogs, or like other kind of, shows that I've done. And I think, no matter what, I'm kind of trying to approach it from a place of naturalism, even though, things are stylized. I guess I'm always trying to approach it from like, which is kind of like a buzzword that you use a lot, but there's like from a grounded perspective, and from a place that's like grounded in like the character details. And so, for me, I always try to approach it from that angle and say, okay, if we're building from the reality of these characters, regardless of whether it's a post-apocalyptic thing, regardless of whether it's a crazy, perhaps locked in a dream prison, of a TV show nightmare thing, or whether it's actually supposed to be a very specific time and place that exists. I think in all of those things, I'm just trying to start it from, well, what is the reality of the character, and what does that dictate? And whether that's, in terms of color choices, whether that's in terms of, the set decoration, whether that's in terms of all those things. I think with all of them, I'm trying to say, what would the character do in this situation? What do we know about the character to figure it out? And I guess that's one thing about process in terms of like breaking down the script. I read an interview with, I think it was maybe like Mel Bourne, or it was like another kind of like legendary production designer, who was saying that when he breaks down the script, he would break it down into like character qualities and, come out of it with a list of, at least like, 4 or 5 points of character qualities for each character that's in there, in terms of like, oh, this person is selfish, this person is this person is this, and kind of uses that as, to kind of guide, putting together the spaces and putting together like the basic facts of the characters afterward. And I have yet to successfully do that. But I do think about it often, and I do often feel bad about not doing it since I read that. But I do kind of think about that when I'm like, oh yeah, like when you get down to it, it's like, well, what are the characteristics that we know of this person? And like, how does that dictate what their space would be like? And I think as long as you kind of get into that, then you can kind of do anything you want to. And, even in TV Glow, when, it is more stylized, for me, I think it's still hopefully grounded in like what these characters, actually would experience, and in their world. And, because of that, you kind of have a freedom to actually get out there and say, we can kind of do what we want to, as long as we're true to the characters, as long as we're true to the story in that way, as long as we start from this place of being grounded in that first and foremost. So that's, and I take as much joy in doing something that is stylized as I do in taking something that is completely, natural and naturalistic and realistic and everything in that way. In some cases, I think it's, I love the attention that the design gets in certain projects, but I also love it when people talk about Reservation Dogs. And, I had an encounter, I was working on another film, and saw in the BTS crew were like, oh my God, we love Reservation Dogs, et cetera. They're very into it. And they're like, and we were friends, and they were like, don't take this the wrong way, but it seems like you don't do anything on that show. Like, what do you do? And so I was like, you know what? I'm not going to take that in the wrong way. But thank you for that compliment. And and that's sort of what I love, is where it's like, oh, you want the spaces to feel so authentic and so, kind of grounded and realistic that people are like, did anybody even design this? This just looks so true to life, but also, so cinematic in a way. And that's, again, to get back to the kind of film versus TV thing. I try to bring that to the TV work also, where it's like, I didn't have much experience working in television before Reservation Dogs. And it's pretty hilarious because I don't think anybody did who worked on that show. Like the DP had worked in television before, but the line producer hadn't, I hadn't, the showrunners really hadn't. It was really kind of a lot of people who were very much film people jumping into it. And I think there are moments in the beginning of that show where at least myself, I was like, I can't believe this is how people make television. This seems crazy. This is the best system we've come up with in terms of, how we're going to prep, shoot, wrap, and do all these things at the same time. But so, I think in that way, I sort of do try to bring, that cinematic element even to the TV work, where it's okay, I don't really think that we're making a TV show. I think that we're just making a movie, and it just happens to be told in several different installments in that way. So I kind of try to bring that to it as well. But I think that's it. Like I said, I enjoy doing the stylized work. It's fun. And, it's always fun to kind of be creative like that. But, the last thing that I really want is for somebody to be like, oh my God, man, that couch was amazing. I love that couch in that scene. Cause it's yeah, well, what about the rest of the scene? It's not about the couch. It's the story that we're telling. And hopefully the couch should be a seamless part of that story. And and should get into it. Once you get to the point where I think you're really clocking the design or really kind of seeing the design as design, then it's kind of oh, I guess I haven't really truly done my job, because my job is to kind of subtly manipulate you into feeling a certain way or thinking a certain way about the characters or telling you their stories in this way. And if you're thinking about how I did that, or that sort of thing, then it's sort of a little bit of a less impressive trick than if you don't realize that I was doing that in the first place.
Yeah. So it just goes to show that comment, oh, what did you do? It's well, I did my job.
Exactly. What did you do, pal? I did my job.
Now, speaking of Reservation Dogs, you won the Art Directors Guild Award. So congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, I really appreciate it.
Now, can you tell us about your process for that series?
Yeah, definitely. I guess really the episode that we won kind of the ADG award for was a boarding school episode. And it was an episode in season 3 that was kind of really very different than anything else that we had sort of made so far. And, for that one, it was sort of going to be our most ambitious construction and scenic project to date. We were doing a period episode, kind of in keeping with the way that Sterling and the other writers and directors kind of wanted to reveal new aspects of, this kind of the Native American experience to television audiences. We hadn't really seen these sort of American Indian boarding schools on television before, and in film, really, in American film or TV, really. And, and these were institutions that were set up by the United States government and, by the Catholic Church to forcibly assimilate Native Americans and as part of an overall kind of, genocidal agenda and kind of tragic history that was going on. And so, we wanted to be able to tell that story. And as soon as I got the script for that episode, before we started officially prepping, I kind of was researching as hard as possible and just getting, every kind of image of boarding schools from 1940s, 1930s, 1920s, kind of just around. And we visited archives in Anadarko, Oklahoma, that actually was a boarding school at one point to kind of get further information on it. We actually brought on board an author of a book called Stringing Rosaries, which is a history of Plains boarding schools. And, Denise came on as our technical advisor and kind of answered all of our questions about small things from plates and spoons to other things like corporal punishment and all these other kind of really sort of insidious details. I think, and while we were working on it in the art department, there were people who actually were in the art department whose relatives had been to institutions like this and who had kind of lived through these things. And so it really had a lot of weight to it. And, we kind of felt the dual responsibility of this is such an important story. We need to tell this and tell it in the right way. And also, this is such a sensitive topic, this is such a sensitive area, and it's so weighty for so many people here. We need to be careful with what we're doing and be careful in terms of, with people's kind of emotions and sensitivities in that way. And so, we once we had all the research, I kind of, talked to the director, Dennis Goulet, of the episode, and we kind of talked about doing a sort of a 70s aesthetic for it. 70s horror aesthetic, kind of like, zooms and sort of a color palette from the remake of Suspiria. The idea being to make it less like a gritty documentary, because the subject matter is already so kind of potent, and more kind of like almost like a dream, or more almost kind of like a kind of like a fantasy in that way, to sort of like, make the subject matter still kind of impactful, but to not kind of beat you over the head with, this is a doc about this. So then, we came into it and kind of worked all those things out, and then found great locations that kind of were all clustered together, since we only had a couple of days to shoot all those portions of it. Went to work kind of building the scenery, knew that, there were elements from the references that we wanted to replicate exactly, in terms of hardwood floors, in terms of, some paneling, in terms of, these details that kind of made these sort of the children kind of feel trapped in there, and wanted to add smaller details like little crosses, like on the plinth blocks that kind of finish off the paneling, just so that there's always these omnipresent sort of symbols of power and of sort of dominance. And, so we did that, and the whole team crushed it. And the set decoration department came in and added so many, great details from local museums, from the local community, who kind of helped us source these things, since we had been so kind of working closely with them for the past 3 years. And, really every detail down to like each sort of pencil, every detail down to, the lesson plan that's on the chalkboard, down to all of those things. And yeah, basically, I kind of do that. And we had a crazy situation come up where, and I mentioned this in the ADG speech, where about a week before we were supposed to start installing all of our scenery and dressing these locations and everything, we had this catastrophic fire in the set deck warehouse and construction warehouse and scenic warehouse, and basically destroyed so much of what we had made, so much of what we had kind of sourced, these museum quality rentals, people's individual kits and tools, even family heirlooms that have been given to us were all kind of destroyed. And what hadn't been sort of destroyed in the fire was ruined by the fire hoses when they were trying to put it out. And so, we had essentially a week to figure out, okay, how are we going to sort of rebuild what we've done without a shop, without, the people's individual tools, without these things. Really, as a credit to the art department, like nobody flinched at all. We kind of knew that we couldn't change the schedule without incurring real cost to production in a way that would have really curtailed the way that we wanted to tell the story and shooting time and other things like that. So we knew we kind of had to pull it together, and everyone just kind of really did what they had to do to figure it out and to do it. And on the day there were 50 children, extras and actors there in their costumes. There were a community elder who kind of played a couple of roles on the show over the years, came in and led everybody in kind of a prayer song, and there was a lot of emotion just seeing all those kids in those spaces and just seeing all those things. And it was again, it was kind of a reminder of how important those stories are and how important that show is to a lot of people. And it was an amazing thing to be a part of. And that kind of, to bring it back to, the ADG award, that's kind of what made me, it's an amazing thing anyway, but that's sort of what made me so incredibly and continually grateful for it, was that I'm not going to get emotional about it. We're only in minute 35 here. I'm not going to get emotional. But no, so, people, I know what it took for the people who were in a really tough spot, and could have given up and could have sacrificed the quality and could have compromised the quality or the storytelling. But they didn't, because they really believed so strongly in the power of storytelling and in the power of telling that story in this rich visual detail. And it really communicated to people how dehumanizing the atmosphere was, how terrible the atmosphere was, and how terrible that history is. And how real that history is. And so, to see their belief in this power of storytelling acknowledged in this way by our peers and by that was really powerful. And it was really meaningful to me, both in that moment, and it continues to be as well. So that's a little bit, about that sort of specific set and that specific episode. In terms of, process in general for the show, I mean, I I can't say enough times that I just feel really grateful to have been a small part of that show and to have been a really small part of telling those stories. And, it was the sort of thing where, for me, one of the greatest parts of being a designer is designing on location and going to a place and, getting to kind of drive around and getting to really experience it and getting to know that you're going to try to, communicate the essence of a place, through the work that you're doing. And so I think to me, it's a lot about, and that's what happened going to Oklahoma. It was a lot about driving around with the locations people and locations folks, and kind of, seeing up the town of Okmulgee where we shot the fictional town of O'Kern. Okmulgee is the seat of the Muskogee Creek Nation, and is also just in some ways a small town in Oklahoma. And so being there and getting to be invited into people's homes to scout people's homes for different locations, was incredible. And I really took every opportunity to sort of respectfully say like, okay, to observe those details and to say, oh, what's this Bible quote that's on the fridge? What's the cereal that's on top of the fridge? What's, how are the family photos displayed? Was all that. Because I feel like such a huge part of designing is in sort of figuring out the importance of those details and then figuring out how to convey that to a larger audience, when you're actually kind of putting the sets together. And, making sure that you're imbuing them with that warmth and that authenticity and that, sense of intimacy that comes from actually being in someone's space, and that comes from actually being in an environment like that. And I think, if you're doing it correctly, then, and my goal when I'm trying to design is, I'm trying to show, someone else. I'm trying to allow people to live in someone else's experience. I'm trying to accumulate enough character details. I'm trying to accumulate enough kind of authenticity. I'm trying to accumulate enough kind of, warmth, if that's what the space needs, and connection that, watching it, you kind of get a sense for another person's experience. And, and I think all of those qualities kind of build and breed a certain sense of empathy. And you kind of get to see about another human being's world. And so I think, if I'm doing it right, then hopefully I'm building empathy out there, in the viewers and everyone else. And so, that's my goal. And part of the process of Reservation Dogs was just like, how can we make sure that we're fulfilling this and mandate at all times? And, for me, I think a big part of it was, I read this quote by Lily Gladstone about the work is better when you let the world influence the work, or inform the work. And I believe that 100%. And I also think that for me, a big part of it was just making sure that the community was represented in the art department as much as possible, and making sure that we're, and not just in terms of like staffed positions in the art department, but also in terms of like the artists that we're working with. And, we had the good fortune to work with so many amazing artists from the community who really kind of, lent their talents to these various kind of pieces. And, the mural outside of the IHS, the mural inside the IHS break room, that's like a buffalo mural, the great beadwork, just, Johnny Dicon, Yadika Starfields, Molly Murphy Adams, so many amazing kind of artists that, really I was just lucky enough to be able to collaborate with in those ways. And, brought that sense of authenticity and that sense of warmth and that sense of, specific place and aesthetic to it. And so for me, my process in that show was a big part about just making sure that, hey, that we're representing the community in that way, both within the art department and with the people that we're collaborating with outside of it. And, and that's the priority. I think I told this story. I written about this. I wrote a piece in Perspective, the ADG magazine, recently, and kind of led off with this anecdote where the first day of shooting of Reservation Dogs, we were in the parking lot of the IHS, and it was on the call sheet, there was kind of an announcement for an every person meeting, like, everybody on the casting crew, basically that's there, like whether you're in the office or whether you're any place, like be on set at that moment at call. And, it was because there was a drum ceremony, and there were, some community elders who were welcoming us to the land. And there was, Sterling, also kind of speaking to us about, where we are and about the community that we're in and about the importance of that. And, I think that really set the tone so nicely of okay, yes, we're here to make a TV show. Yes, we're here to like, to do this. And we're telling the story of these 4 indigenous teenagers in Oklahoma. But at the same time, we're here because, we want to listen and learn from this community, and we want to, be respectful, and we want to, be a part of telling these stories in that way. And as I said, I'm just really grateful to have been a part of that and to have been able to, kind of adapt my process and my design process to really prioritize, kind of what that North Star was, which was, that's why we're here. And then these are the stories that we're telling, and this is the way that we're going to tell them. One last thing I guess I'll say is, and I know I've said that several times before, and that hasn't been the last thing that I've said, but this one will be the last thing I say about this particular point is just process-wise. I think in a lot of ways we were, you're going through it in a way that you would on TV shows where you're scouting locations, then you're bringing the art department there once you've confirmed them with the director and everything and DP, but then you're bringing the art department there, then you're making your plans for what you're going to do, thinking about your builds and all of those elements. All those things kind of, the way that you would kind of run on a TV show, we were doing that. But I think, we had done some other things like, our graphics meetings, that we had, basically once a week. Those were things where it was like, okay, yes, it's the graphic designer, it's me, it's the art director, and set decorator, but also I want to have the art assistant in here. I want to have like, I want everybody who wants to be here to be in here because, I want to hear what the art assistant thinks is, appropriate for this character's bedroom wall because, they've lived a very similar experience in that way. And I want to make sure that it feels right to them. And so, so we really kind of opened things up a bit in that way. But I think, one thing that also is about the process is we really started to prioritize. And this is something that I honestly like has changed my process of like design overall with like everything that I approach. Like every project that I've done kind of since then, I've kind of approached it with this, and I'm still kind of working on defining this method for myself. But, honestly, we kind of looked at it from a perspective of, yes, like we obviously are concerned with what the camera will see, but we're kind of more deeply concerned with what everyone in the room is going to kind of experience when they're there, like in that moment. And, that could be the actors who are from the community, that could be the crew members who are from the community, that could be the people from down the block who just kind of stop by just to see what's going on and everything. We want all of those people to be impacted positively by the choices that we're making with the design and the decoration, and to feel that something is right, authentic, appropriate, warm, how it needs to be. And so, I think just placing that sort of emphasis on, oh, yes, like we're kind of in the space with these people now, and like we're kind of being entrusted with helping to tell these stories. And so we really need to make sure that we're telling them in the way that feels right to them, not just in the way that looks right on the monitor, or not just in the way that considers like, oh, okay, like what's it going to look like in 3 months when it's out, or 4 months or whatever. Like it was really about like being in the moment. And that led us to just really sort of doing everything that we possibly could to make sure that we had so many details and so many sort of pieces in there that really meant so much to everybody, and that were significant to everybody who were going to be in those spaces with us. And so, if we kind of had the opportunity to do something that would mean something to even one person, whether it was like visually alluding to a family history, whether it was like, just kind of including something like that, like we would do that. And we would kind of try to like move the earth to like make those things happen. And so I think a big, part of the process was just like, okay, that, and, an example of that is Mabel's bedroom in season 2. Laura Dannon's grandmother, there's an episode where, she passes on, kind of surrounded in her bed, surrounded by like community members who are kind of like, who are kind of surrounding her with like song and prayer and et cetera. And so we knew that her bedroom was going to be such an important set. And we knew that a lot of the people who were going to be playing the elders who were there were actual community elders who were artists, who were people who we had interacted with, who were people who were like such a big part of informing our approach to the show. And so we knew that, hey, they've been through these experiences before also. And like, this is something where we have a chance to really match that sense of intimacy and that sense of authenticity with the set. And so, we kind of put out a call for people on the crew and cast who had objects that were significant to them, that, spoke to them about somebody who they know who had passed on. And so, we kind of got a painting from Neosha Pendergraft, who's in the prop department. Her mother is a known Cherokee artist, and she had passed away, and we got a painting from her mother and of her mother's. And, Lauren Waters in the casting department, she gave us photos of her grandparents. And Taba, the set decorator, she stole this thing called the hunk board, which was like her aunt's like board of like faded like Bon Jovi and like Marlon Brando photos and stuff that she had like always kind of like had up in her room. And so we kind of filled the space with all of these really emotionally significant objects, just, knowing that on the day we want everyone to get totally lost in this world and in kind of the emotion of it. And I think, everybody, there were a lot of tears, and there was a lot of kind of, I think it really kind of, rang true in that moment. And that's something that I've kind of taken with me in that way, which is like, I want to design the sets for the camera, sure. But like, I want to design the sets for the people that are there. And like, whether it's the DP, the director, the actors, whoever it is, like, I want it to be so full of detail and so full of like, these kind of like crazy small elements and these kind of really thought through moments that the camera couldn't possibly capture them all. But everyone who's in there is going to get lost together in this world and do their best work and, do their most kind of like authentic, intimate work, together, like creating this art, like in that moment. And so that's a big thing that happened to me process wise that I kind of took from that show. So that was
I feel like the authenticity of Reservation Dogs, it really shines through. I grew up in a small town in the panhandle of Texas, very close to Oklahoma. So a lot of the locations felt very familiar to me, and just the authenticity of, I grew up in a Mexican family, and like going over to my grandma's house and seeing all of the things in her house, like seeing those sets, it made me almost feel like I was back there. So it just really shined through. And I felt like it shined through in the actors' performances as well. It was so authentic. It was such an incredible show.
And thank you so much for saying that. I really appreciate it. And I really appreciate that rings true with your family experience as well. And like, it's funny because we, when we were looking for references for like Mabel's house or for other kind of houses, like, we would look at like the assistant art directors or like RPAs or like, people who had grown up in that community and like the other folks in the art department, graphic designers, et cetera, who like, they had their family photos and they'd be like, can we look at your family photos? And we'd be like, yeah. So we'd be like looking at their family photos and be like, oh man, that's a great detail. Like, we got to do this. And they'd be like, oh yeah, my aunt, got this from this or like that thing. And so it was like a really fun experience to kind of say like, okay, yeah, let's try to bring this as close to this kind of authentic reality as we can and make it feel like a family space, make the connections apparent, make it feel like that. So I'm happy that rang true in that way for you as well. So.
Excellent. Yes. So thank you to you and the team for everything that you guys did. You did an amazing job.
Now it's all the team. But no, it was an amazing team. I will say that it was a great all 3 years, but especially the third year, amazing art department, amazing group of people, amazing people to collaborate with. And it, really felt kind of like a family. And that's why if I seem like I'm getting a little choked up talking about some details, it's because it does feel like that was kind of like a really kind of close familial atmosphere. And I'm happy to be a part of it and grateful to be a part of it, but also, there's some sadness that it's over in a way. So, yeah.
Well, you can be sad that it's over, but glad that it happened.
I didn't mean to come so close to that, like, tourist level phrase. I walked right into it. Yeah.
Now, switching gears just a little bit, for a project like I saw the TV Glow that has a really rich atmosphere, could you define the word atmosphere? Is that something that you use with cinematographers or DPs or directors?
That's a tough question. I think sometimes on Reservation Dogs we joke, a lot of times we joke around about that mise en scène. We're kind of like always like joking about that and saying, oh yeah, it's got the mise en scène is off the charts here and everything, and joking at the pretensions of that. And I think that in terms of atmosphere, I guess to be honest about it, we didn't really talk so much about the atmosphere for like That's How the TV Glow, as we would talk kind of about like, the overall aesthetics, and, how it comes down to like lighting, and that sort of way, and just colors, and those sort of tones. And again, sort of the character details. And I think that, again, like it's helpful to have, and, we did it many times, have like a key reference or like a couple of key references, whether they're from Jane or from me or just things that we agreed on, where it's sort of like, okay, this is sort of like the atmosphere that we're going for, or like this is sort of like the vibe that we're going for overall. This is like the feeling of like what it wants to feel like in that way. And so I think that came into it a lot, where it was more like, how does this want to make you feel? Like, how do we want this set to make the character feel? And how do we want this set to make you as a viewer feel? And how do we want to feel like when we're there also? And so I think that comes into it, in terms of atmosphere, where it's more like, getting that sort of vibe down. And like I said, we use some key references for that before we break off into the, more individual references. But I forgot to mention in my reference process earlier also, I am a maniac in the sense that like I have references for how the references should be hung up in the office. So like I've always done those in this project too, where I'm like, this is the reference for the reference wall for that thing. But yeah, so I do think that, what was I going to say? Oh yeah, so in terms of atmosphere, we kind of talk about more like feelings and about more like, okay, like how is it supposed to feel? And once you kind of identify that, and that kind of goes back to, one thing that Jane said in their initial kind of director lookbook and that we kind of conversed about afterwards, which, really kind of knocked me out when I was reading the lookbook was, they really said it's not like we're trying to like replicate, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, or we're not trying to make it look like a 1990s like TV show. Like we're trying to instead make it look like the feeling you had when you watched that show. And I was like, that sounds incredibly challenging. And also incredibly brilliant in that way, where it's like, what? And I feel like that was kind of and I have these things in my own process that I like to call like North Stars, where it's like, okay, like whatever happens in this project, however we get, mixed up and all this, what are the principles that we can look back to as like really our guiding kind of principles that we want to lay out in the beginning as like, this is where we're headed toward. And, one of those was in our first meeting for that movie, or the first like production meeting, Jane was like, this is a movie that, we are going to make, and it's going to be a movie that's going to play at IFC midnight in 20 years, and that's like the type of movie that we're making. And, and like, that was one of those guiding principles. And then also just thinking about like, okay, like, there were many times when I was like, well, okay, should I be looking at like specific paint colors that Nickelodeon or that like the WB used in like 1996, and like looking at those colors and then maybe like riffing on or using those specific colors, or restricting myself to like those colors for the show, that sort of thing. Or like, how can I replicate this atmosphere and these things? And then, just always came back to, it's not really about replicating anything. It's not really about, kind of duplicating it. It's about capturing that feeling of what it felt like to be a teenager and watching these shows and, questioning these things and what that represented to you, and kind of trying to sum up that experience and trying to capture that in it. So, yeah, so I think that's, a long-winded way of saying, when it comes to atmosphere, we kind of talk about feelings in that way.
Okay, excellent. Yeah. Now, for those production designers that are just getting started, do you have any low-budget hacks that you might be able to share?
That's a great question. I feel like, I think there is, okay, this is going to be a frustrating answer, but I think that, because I wish that I had specific things like, oh yeah, if you go to Home Depot, then you can shoplift from Home Depot. I'm not going to say that. You got to get things done. You got to get things done. And you believe in the importance of the story. But when it comes to, I think if you are a designer and if you are holding yourself to the highest standards, and if you are, extremely passionate about the project that you're making and believe that you need to tell this story and that it needs to be told in the richest visual detail you can kind of accomplish, especially when you're starting out, you're going to, there's always a gap, but especially when you're starting out, there's a gap between those expectations and the reality of the budget and the logistics and those other things. And, that gap exists at any level of production, whether it's, $100 million movie, $50 million movie, $5 million movie, $500,000 movie. There's always that gap. It just, gets wider, gets smaller, or changes in different ways. But, and I think that when you're just starting out, especially, one of the things that kind of, is required of a designer is to be able to bridge that gap with kind of enthusiasm and passion and, motivation and just kind of sheer like work ethic. And so I think that there are a lot of moments where, and you're encouraging other people to do that too, of course, in a safe and responsible way that, it takes their own considerations into mind, but also like that's part of your thing is like, can you essentially build a team, and can you unify them around a vision, and can you motivate them to accomplish that vision, even though it seems impossible or even though it seems crazy. And I think that those are like qualities or characteristics that are great to have when you're a beginner designer, because that's kind of like what you're running on. Like you don't, when you get to like a certain place and you're like working on like union projects and you're working on other things, and people show up to work because, there is a paycheck involved and there are other things involved, and those considerations you have to deal with in other ways too, and strategize how you can maintain that same enthusiasm, maintain that same level of commitment and passion with your work when other people are, motivated by different things to show up. But in the beginning, those other motivations don't really exist. Everyone's getting paid, not much, or nothing, or depending on what you're doing. And it's kind of incumbent upon you to motivate, and incumbent upon you to make sure that everyone is kind of doing what they need to do to accomplish the vision and to tell the story in the way. And so, so I think that's just part of being a designer, being a department head in general, and being a leader to some degree. Like and I think part of that is like, some of the hacks are like that I would say are like, I don't think that anybody, particularly, I guess I tried, especially in the beginning, to like maintain a positive attitude about a lot of things. Like I think that when you're leading a team of people, even if things are tough, like nobody thinks it's fun when like the person who's like leading it is like, God, this sucks. Or like, can you believe that like the VP did this? Or like, this is like a waste of our time and stuff like that. Like, and you want to maintain a sense of, honesty with the situation, and be honest with people about what's happening and what the challenges are and what's going on. But you kind of owe it to people because you've convinced them to sign on. You've convinced them to dedicate these hours of their life, which they could be doing anything else with. But you've convinced them to help you make this work of art with these other people. And because of that, you have kind of a responsibility to, make sure that their experience is, is viable, that their experience is kind of like lives up to that, that promise that you've kind of made them in that way. And so, I remember like the second movie that I designed, or third movie that I designed, or something that was, very small, very independent, very kind of low budget. And just talking with a friend and being like, God, like, this is terrible. Like, these people are terrible. Like, it's like, this is awful. Like, this is awful, And I was like, what is there kind of like left to kind of like show up for, like, in a way? And, and my friend, who is like a producer and who is like somebody who is like been a great influence, a great friend in my life, was like, well, I mean, you have to just like show up to make it fun for the people in the art department that are like, that trusted you enough to like get on the job with you and do this. Like, they're in it too, and like, so it's like, so just prioritize that, like, for the moment, like, in addition to like the work you're doing, but just like, in terms of like the emotions and the psychology of it, like, just think about that. Just think about like, what are, how can you ensure that like all of you guys are having an enjoyable time, even though, and you're getting the work done, even though everybody else is a monster, even though everybody else is kind of, falling apart in a way. And so, so I kind of just think about that when I'm like, oh yeah, like, again, like part of the thing of starting off is, and, I had an agent tell me that, years ago also, is that like one thing that helps designers like move up in the levels to like budget level to budget level is like, A, can you manage the budget? B, can you, manage like the circumstances and the scale of things, and just keep everything within your scope and keep yourself even keel, and, be a positive presence on set, and those things. But C, can you kind of motivate a team to kind of, can you lead a team in that way to keep it together and to kind of accomplish impossible things? Especially in independent film, you're trying to accomplish things that are like, if you just looked at it, you'd be like, oh, that's crazy. We can't do that. Like, that's not going to happen. But you just have to bridge that gap with your own belief and your own passion and your own enthusiasm. And just bring other people across that gap with you to the place where you need to be in terms of, telling story, in terms of those visuals. And so, yeah, so that is your job to do that. And that's kind of, again, I said that would be a frustrating answer. Better hacks than that. But I think that's kind of a big part of it too. And then I think, one other thing that I'll say, and this will be the last thing that I say on this topic, I promise, is that, I always try to, there are times when like collaborating with people is tough on set. And like, that's true of a no budget music video. That's true of a gigantic movie. Like, it's, every collaboration is different, and there are going to be moments where it's challenging, and there are going to be moments where like, you'll be tempted to like let your emotions get involved or let like different things kind of enter into the process or into the conversation. And again, I just try to always remember the one principle for me is like, and especially when I was starting off, the one thing I always tried to remember is like, obviously, like what is the goal here? And like the goal is to like make the best piece of art possible. And the goal is to like advance, your collaborations with these people into the future, or to like have everybody walk away with like a positive impression of those things, and of you as an individual, as a collaborator, as an artist, all these things. While essentially making sure that there's due respect being shown to everyone and that you're standing up for yourself when necessary, all these different things. But I think that, within that, I'm always like, okay, like what's the goal here? And especially starting off, it was just like, you're in a crazy like indie world where some people get it, some people don't get it. Some people are like not going to be working in film in like a year. Some people are like, this thing. And for all of that, it's like, okay, like no matter who you have to deal with, no matter what the collaboration is, no matter what the project is, the goal is, to make the best piece of art possible, like in the circumstances. So make sure that your actions align with that and that you're being a part of, making that happen rather than any kind of like other, drag on that goal, or any other kind of like, counter motion to that goal. But that's just me. I don't know. So.
Well, Brandon, those are all the questions we have for you today. Thank you so much for taking the time. It's been such a pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you so much for having me and for allowing me to talk about these projects that I really love and about something that I really love, which is kind of designing and being a part of that. So thank you. I appreciate it.
For more deep dives into the StudioBinder software or filmmaker interviews, be sure to like and subscribe to be notified when new videos are added. I'm Brandon with StudioBinder Academy. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.